We open in the point of view of a woman calling out for her daughter, Karen. The mother keeps calling and calling, but receives no answer, her voice only growing more concerned.
Karen?
She walks throughout the house until she reaches Karen's room. We don't know what's happening exactly, but there's an air of something being really, really wrong. But soon, we realize why Karen's not answering. When we find her on the floor of her closet, abnormally thin and dead. This is the way that Carpenter's singer, Karen Carpenter, was found when she had passed away at the age of 32 due to her losing battle with anorexia nervosa, a mental disorder that causes sufferers to obsess over their weight and the food that they eat, an obsession that reportedly started from statements made by journalists and columnists, calling the singer chubby. Because of these comments, Karen's anorexia had went unchecked for several years, and throughout her career, Carpenter's disorder would only grow more concerning to fans, friends, and family. Worries of the singers skipping meals and even hiding food permeated through her inner circles, while gasps could audibly be heard from the audience when the singer would take stage over her startling and troublesome appearance. I've always been personally fascinated by the death of Karen Carpenter through her beautiful, haunting vocals, juxtaposed with a concerning physical appearance. In interviews, it's obvious that there's something wrong as Karen continually smiles and denies anything going on, citing exhaustion from touring as the reason for canceled shows and dieting for her appearance. There's something deeply macabre and sad about these interviews, knowing what we know today. During this particular interview, Karen had already begun to abuse laxatives by taking 80 to 90 tablets per night. And later towards the end of her life, syrup of ipecac, a medication that's used to induce vomiting. Throughout the 70s and early 80s, Karen reportedly was very dodgy about the issue concerning her dieting. Due to this, many have wondered what her experience was like, and what Karen had felt during those final years. These final years of her life were dramatized in the film Superstar, the Karen Carpenter story, a bizarre, unauthorized, low-budget film that, instead of using actors to portray the characters, used Barbie dolls and miniature sets. The film was a student project that was conceived by director Todd Haynes, who would later go on to make films like I'm Not There and Carol. Haynes had sought to present the mindset of Karen Carpenter and other people in her plays who suffered from anorexia and the control over their own bodies. This is an idea that could easily come across as a sanitized fluff piece for the band that would go on to winning multiple Oscars, similar to that of movies like Ray and Bohemian Rhapsody. But Haynes instead presents Superstar as an avant-garde nightmare, one that tries its best to reveal Carpenter's battle with her identity, freedom, and anorexia, while also representing the turmoil that the mental illness causes. The film opens with a young Karen Carpenter thrust into the life of stardom by her parents, when they feel that her older brother, Richard Carpenter, would ultimately fail on his own.
Trying to criticize. You know we love your music. All I'm saying is that it needs more
punch.
Exactly. To break in. What you need is a singer.
Paired together as the Carpenters, Richard and Karen are immediately introduced to a record executive, offering a record deal for them. The executive begins to promise the two, namely Karen, a life of stardom and happiness, and ultimately, protection in his hands once they sign. His hand begins to reach out towards Karen, as the film begins to feel uncomfortable, and as his hand reaches Karen, this happens.
But don't you worry. We're a real family here at A&M. We'll take real good care of you. All you have to do is put yourself in my hands.
As the audience, we are given almost a premonition of what is to come in the form of footage of soldiers husking a malnourished body into a sea of corpses. As the body hits the pit, a loud shriek can be heard, cementing the feeling of an inescapable nightmare. While it's certainly an unsubtle statement of Hollywood churning out female stars and chipping away at them mentally and physically, something we are all too familiar with in the age of Me Too, the film turns the real-life image of selling your soul to the devil into something far more frightening than we could ever imagine. The best way I could describe this movie is voyeuristic. Watching the film feels almost forbidden, like we were never meant to see any of this. The low-grade film, the dingy sets, the startling cuts from moments that feel all too real add this creepy quality to the film. Moments that begin to feel real or dark are interrupted and cut away to scenes that feel far more upbeat, giving off the feeling that there's just something to hide.
Constant care.
I'll cook for you.
She's gonna fatten you up.
No more dieting.
No more laxatives.
And we'll all be together again.
However, the forbidden nature of the film can also be attributed to the availability of this particular movie. Superstar had certainly found some minimal success in the film festival circuit when it was released in 1987, but was ultimately met with a copyright lawsuit from the Carpenter family, who were reportedly furious over the portrayal of the family's effect on Karen, as well as unauthorized use of the Carpenter's music used throughout the film. But was the anger over the film really justified? It's important to remember when watching this movie that the film does certainly take liberties with the real-life story and everyone involved. It's possible we'll never have a completed story of Karen's struggle. The only catharsis we will ever receive over Karen's death comes in the form of tell-all books or accounts from people who claim to be the closest to her. But Superstar, I feel, understands this by not scapegoating a particular facet of Karen's personal life or her relationships, but instead the film paints a picture using perceptions that would cause anyone to be driven to the brink of this illness. Karen in the film feels trapped by her overbearing parents, her career-obsessed brother, and the weight of being one of the biggest music acts in the world. That pressure, mixed with an already negative perception of her physique, blows up into an obsession with weight and food that gives way to an addiction that Karen sees as control over her own body and appearance. The Carpenter family reportedly were a very tight-knit family. Karen and Richard's parents were quick to lay down harsh rules for the duo growing up and would rarely let the two out of their sight for long. Even at the height of their career, they were encouraged to continue living at home to ensure the two had avoided the toxic sides of fame. From an outside perspective, it's not hard to view this as a helicopter parent wanting to keep their child safe from the dangers of the outside world. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but when taken to a certain degree, it would make anyone feel suffocated. And when put in the perception of someone grappling with a lack of control over their own life, home can quickly feel like a prison. In the film, Karen passes out on stage during a performance in Vegas due to exhaustion, and is treated at home by being stuffed with food until she regains her normal weight. It ultimately fails to remedy the obstacles of the illness, and in many ways, as the film explains, it even causes the anorexic to fall deeper into their obsession and habits. In the film, this is portrayed as a claustrophobic nightmare in Karen's eyes, as we watch a woman slowly killing herself for a sense of control become far more isolated and trapped. The irony of this being, of course, that even when Karen finds her way out of the family home and into a sense of freedom, she's left alone to her own devices, and the worst parts of her obsession begin to take full control over her, to the point where even when Karen accepts that she has a problem and begins to receive psychological help, things with her illness only become far worse. And while it creates for some of the more nightmarish scenes, it also tends to evoke some of the sadder emotions when watching this film. No matter what positive direction this person goes through to improve their life and gain that control she longs for, the illness that created that illusion of freedom only tightens its grip and picks apart their life to the point where it becomes all that they think about. You begin to feel helpless as you become aware of the resulting events taking place and have no way of stopping them. But I'm sure you are all wondering the same thing, the truly important question regarding the uniqueness of this very film. Why are Barbie dolls used in a film that is meant to tackle a real-life person's battle with an illness and their tragic death? To answer this question, though, it is important to discuss what the Carpenters represented in the 70s and in the early 80s.
Let's hear it for the Carpenters.
Immediately, when the Carpenters broke out into mainstream success with hits like Close to You and Top of the World, they were quick to be labeled as squeaky clean and traditional. In an age where rock music, Woodstock, and counterculture were beginning to take control of the pop culture zeitgeist, the Carpenters were seen as too pristine and represented what the average traditional American wanted to listen to.
Richard and Karen Carpenter, you have been able to jump that generation. Old folks like myself really enjoy your music.
A perception that was not helped when President Richard Nixon asked them personally to play at the White House. To many, the Carpenters were considered old-fashioned and bland. Listening to them was just plain uncool for a lot of people, and that opinion has changed in recent years, but it's still one that followed them and that Karen and Richard were uncomfortable with throughout their careers. And when that legacy is coupled with Karen's descent into anorexia, it creates an image of innocence that carries something darker just underneath the surface. I mentioned earlier that many interviews that featured Karen at her skinniest seem to be shrouded in smiles and ambivalence, despite the growing concerns. This is something we even see today in a world of celebrities and social media. An eerie dissonance between the image that's presented to the public and a reality of what happens when the cameras are turned off. The use of Barbie dolls in this story is meant to be a comment on that cheerful mask that were worn not only by the Carpenters, but many entertainment acts in the 60s and 70s. This is made more apparent with scenes being interrupted by distorted images of television shows that present this merry and fake disposition. Something is wrong. Very wrong. And no matter what situation you place these dolls in, they just continue to smile. Much like how, despite there being something very, very wrong, everyone in the movie just wants to pretend that everything is fine and smile through what is clearly a disease wearing down on someone's mind and body. The use of Barbie dolls becomes so much more effective when director Todd Haynes uses a razor blade to whittle down the face of Karen's doll to recreate the malnourished look that the real-life Karen possessed towards the end of her life. It's a startling image that may initially come off as very silly, but in its cerebral execution, it creates a dark and potent story about someone in the world of celebrity pressured by those around them to create an image of perfection and happiness, while they battle very vicious demons in them. This element of the story takes Superstar from just being about Karen Carpenter to a story about isolation and a disease that we have a much better understanding of today, but we still see far, far too many casualties of. Since the film's banning by the Carpenter family, the film has found a life online through the selling of VHS and DVD bootlegs, as well as uploads to YouTube. The mere action of silencing this film has only made people more curious about it. That curiosity has harbored this cult fascination for its eerie and low analog presentation, and has even been mentioned in Entertainment Weekly as one of their top cult films, which is how I managed to discover the film's existence. Although the film is praised in circles of film enthusiasts and collectors of obscure media, the film still to this day has no plans of ever being released publicly. and I don't really foresee that ever changing. So a life of bootlegs and obscurity is where the film will probably remain, only living off the word of others.